Good morning, guys. Hopefully you're having a great day. We're going to go ahead and get started with our lesson today, which is making line plots. But this time, if you notice, look at our fractions. We have halves, we have fourths, we have eighths, we have whole numbers. So we're going to extend what we've been working on and even push it a little bit beyond what we've done. So if you like line plots, this will be your lesson. If you don't, that's okay. We'll still get through it and we'll learn something as we go. I do want to remind you that when or if you get stuck, please don't hesitate to contact me, all right? This is not your parents, your grandparents, your babysitter's responsibility, okay? It's yours. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, we have two columns here. We have a business column and a personal column. And they're talking about the height and the length of envelopes. So these are all the different sizes, because if you think about what either you mail or your parents mail or what a business would mail, there are a lot of different sizes of objects that you need to mail. So you need to have different boxes or envelopes to mail those. So down at the bottom it says plot the heights of all the business and personal envelopes in the line below. All the heights. All right, so that means I can cross out all of these lengths because I am not going to be using those. And I don't want to get confused by them. Now, let's go ahead and take a look down at the bottom at the number line real quick. And let's figure out what we're working with, okay? Let's forget for a minute that this 3.5 is not here, okay? So you have 3 and 4. And if I were to give you guys a task, just like we would in class, and I would say, all right, let's just fill in those blanks with fractions. Well, remember what we did? We counted them. We'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you count this one as well, 8, which means we're working with eighths. So I don't know if I can write small enough. We'll do it like this. All right, so this would be 3 1/8, 3 2/8, 3 3/8, 3 4/8. So now if I said, okay, let's look back at the 3.5, why is it there with 3 4/8? Well, some of you are probably talking to your iPad saying, well, 3 4/8 equals 3.5, right? So they just simplified it. All right, so oops, I had to choose the eraser. All right, so we know that that's 3.5. Well, of the fractions I wrote, are there any other ones that can be simplified, that can be written a different way? Some of you see it right away. It is the 2/8. So 3 2/8 is the same as 3 and what? Well, think about this. Can you take 2 and 8 and divide it by the same number? Like, what number can go into 2 that also goes into 8? Well, if I think of 2, the only numbers I can divide it by are 1 and 2. So let's try 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 3 2/8 is the same as 3 1/4. Okay, so instead of keeping that 2/8, I'm going to change this to a 1/4. Just like what we were doing when we were measuring. Except when we were measuring, remember, the fourths were a little bit longer than the eighths, and then the halves were a little bit longer than the fourths. So that's how it worked. You could tell by how long those lines were, okay? So if I were you, I would go ahead and write in nice and neatly some of these so that you're not getting tripped up later. This would be 3 1/8. The next one would be 3 2/8, which we said is 1/4, or 3 1/4. Then after 2/8 is 3/8. After 3/8 is 4/8, which happens to be a half. Next one would be 5/8. Then we'd have 6/8. Well, let's think about what 6/8 would be. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So it's actually 3/4. Okay, so then after 6/8 would be 7/8, and then you have your 4, which would be 8/8. Okay? All right. If you want to, you can fill those in for the rest of this number line, or if you just want to leave the first ones to help you with the rest of them, that's fine too. Let's start with the title of our graph, of our line plot. What are we talking about here? Well, if I was coming up with one, I might leave it real simple and just say envelope heights. Okay. And then what would all of these numbers down here be? What would we call those? We would still call those heights, but what are we measuring them in? What are we measuring them in? We're measuring them in inches. Perfect. All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause this video, and I want you to try to put those numbers up at the top in here on your number line, on your line plot, please. Okay, let's go. Sorry, I thought I paused it. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and graph these. 3.5, 3 5/8, 3 5/8, 3 3/4, 3 7/8, 3 7/8, 4, 4 1/8, 4.5, 4 3/4, 5, 6, 3 5/8, 4 3/8, 4 3/4, 5 1/4, 5.5, 5 3/4, and 6. All right, so take a look at your line plot. See if that matches my line plot. If it doesn't, one of us might have made a mistake. And I think I actually see one mistake I made right now. On the 5 1/4 here, I graphed that incorrectly. I graphed it as 5 1/8. So let's go ahead and get that moved over. All right, let's get it moved over right here. Perfect. And so that's what your line plot should look like. Now, let's go ahead and use some of this information to try to answer some of the questions on the next page. So on that page 287, let's go ahead and look at what is the largest envelope height sold. So when you look back at your graph, what is the largest envelope height sold? I see the largest as 6 right here. Now, what would be a common answer that would be incorrect? What would be a common answer that would be incorrect? And I would say this one right here, which is 3 5/8. So why would I say 3 5/8? Because that is the one that's the most common. And sometimes kids confuse the most common with the one that's the most. So no, 6 is the most. So when I look at here, I would say 6. Ooh, for some reason it's not. I would say 6. Perfect. What is the smallest envelope height sold? So look back at your graph, find the one that's the smallest that was actually sold, and you're going to find that it is 3.5. A common answer that would be incorrect on this one is 3, because that's what the number that's the smallest on the number line that they see, but there weren't any that were sold that were 3 inches, so it's just 3.5. All right, it says, oh, sorry, I almost did all these for you. What I want you to do is I want you to pause this video real quick and try and see if you can't answer these, and then we'll go over the answers. All right, number 3, which envelope height is stocked the most by the Right Stuff, which is simply the store? Well, when you look back here, which one is stacked the most or stocked the most? their height of 3 5/8. 3 5/8. And now the next question says, what is the difference between the largest and the smallest? Difference between the largest and the smallest. So my largest is 6 right here. My smallest is 3.5. So I'm going to take 6 minus 3.5. All right. So I can think of this as 0 halves. So 0 halves minus 1 half. We need to regroup. Hopefully you saw that. That becomes 5. This becomes 2. 2 halves minus 1 half is 1 half. And 5 minus 3 is 2. So we get 2.5. Perfect. All right, let's move on to the next ones. Number 5, 5A, you had to answer how many of the envelopes sold at the Right Stuff have a height larger than 4 1/8 inches. So you look back here, you needed to find what was, or where 4 1/8 was, which is right here. I'll do it in a different color. 4 1/8, which is right there. How many of them are larger than that? Well, you simply take your pencil and count all the X's that are larger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10. And then your last one you had to do today, how many of the envelopes sold had a height smaller than 4 1/8 inches? So 4 1/8 is still right there in turquoise, and you have to count how many are smaller. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I counted all the ones that were smaller, and that would give me 8. All right, so good luck today with your IXL. A few things I want you to remember. Please log in before you start your IXL. Your login is the first part of your email, then followed by @WesternMS, @WesternMS. And your password is going to be your Skyward password, except I think one of you does not have that, but everybody else is like that. Okay, so please make sure you get started on that and call me, email me if you have any questions. Thank you and good luck.